kept telling myself nothing was happening, because nothing physical had happened. No hotel rooms, no lipstick on a shirt, no late-night excuses. If you'd asked me back then whether my wife was having an affair, I would have said no. I would have been wrong. Looking back, I think I lost my wife months before another man ever became important to her. The affair didn't begin with touching. It began the day she stopped bringing me the little things. My name's David. I'm 59. For more than 30 years, I owned a small electrical contracting business outside Columbus. Nothing special. Mostly houses, service calls, new construction, replacing old breaker panels, fixing whatever decided to quit 5 minutes before dinner. I liked the work. It paid the bills. It gave us a good life. Karen taught 3rd grade until she retired a couple of years before I started slowing down myself. We'd been married 31 years. 1 daughter, Emily. Married, living about 45 minutes away. If you drove past our house, you would have seen exactly what I saw. A quiet neighborhood. A couple who waved at the neighbors. Flowers Karen planted every spring. A pickup truck in the driveway. Nothing that looked broken. That's the dangerous thing about slow endings. From the outside, everything still looks fine. Our days followed the same rhythm. I'd leave around 7. Karen would already be sitting at the kitchen table with coffee and the morning news. I'd kiss the top of her head. See you tonight. Drive safe. Those 2 sentences probably kept our marriage running for 10 years. The trouble was, they also became almost everything we said. Evenings weren't much different. Dinner, the television. She'd read. I'd drift off in my recliner before the local news ended. Around 10, we'd head upstairs. No fights, no slammed doors, no silent treatment. If you'd asked me then, I'd have called it peace. Now, I'd call it 2 people quietly living beside each other. The first thing that caught my attention was so small, I almost laughed at myself for noticing it. Karen started smiling at her phone. Not all the time, just often enough. I'd hear the little chime from the kitchen. She'd pick it up, read something, smile, set it back down. One evening, I asked, "Who keeps making you smile?" She didn't even look up. "Nobody." Her thumbs kept moving across the screen. I waited another second. She never looked up. Finally, I turned back toward the television. It wasn't suspicious. Not really. Married people text people. Friends, family, former co-workers. Still, for some reason I remembered that moment. Karen used to tell me everything. Not the important things, the little things. One of her students losing another tooth. The cashier at the grocery store who always forgot her name. The neighbor whose dog somehow escaped every Tuesday. Tiny stories, the kind you forget 5 minutes later. Then one evening, halfway through dinner, I realized I couldn't remember the last time she'd started a sentence with, "You'll never guess what happened today." The stories hadn't become shorter. They'd disappeared. At first I blamed retirement. Maybe she didn't have as much to talk about anymore. Maybe I didn't either. But then I noticed something else. Dinner ended faster. The television came on sooner. Our coffee sat untouched until it went cold. Some nights we'd sit in the same room for an hour without either of us saying more than a handful of words. It didn't feel awkward. That's what fooled me. It felt normal. Looking back, that's probably when I should have been worried. Karen also started taking longer evening walks. She'd always enjoyed walking, but these weren't 20-minute walks around the block. Sometimes she was gone almost an hour. She'd come home with pink cheeks and wind-blown hair, looking lighter somehow, like she'd left something behind out there. One evening I joked, "You training for a marathon?" She laughed. I don't think my knees would survive that. Then what's with all the walking? It clears my head, she smiled. Everybody needs somewhere to think. I nodded. Fair enough. I meant it. Everybody does need somewhere to think. I just never wondered why she no longer wanted to think beside me. A few weeks later, she came home carrying shopping bags. Nothing expensive, a couple of sweaters, new jeans, a light jacket. I held one up. Somebody's updating her wardrobe. She smiled. I was overdue. You trying to impress somebody? She looked straight at me, then laughed. Maybe myself? I laughed too. It sounded like exactly the kind of answer Karen would have given. Still, something about it stayed with me long after she'd gone upstairs. Not because of what she said, because she seemed excited to tell me. I realized I hadn't seen that kind of spark in one of our conversations for a long time. Friday evening, I grilled hamburgers. The weather had finally cooled off. We carried our plates onto the back patio. For a few minutes, it almost felt like old times. Then her phone buzzed. She looked down, smiled. A quiet smile, the kind that happens before you even realize you're smiling. What is it? She looked up. Oh, nothing. Come on. What made you laugh? She hesitated. I already told him. The word stopped in the air. She looked at me, then quickly corrected herself. I mean, I already talked about it today. She slipped the phone into her pocket, picked up her hamburger, started eating, like nothing had happened. I stared at my plate for a second. Then I picked up my hamburger too. Neither of us mentioned it again, but all weekend, one sentence kept repeating itself in my head. I already told him. I kept asking myself the same question. Who was him? And why had she been so quick to erase his name? For the next few weeks, I worked hard to convince myself I'd imagined it. People don't throw away 31 years over one awkward sentence. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. If I'd found hotel receipts, or a second phone, or lipstick on a coffee mug that wasn't hers, maybe I'd have known what I was dealing with. Instead, everything looked exactly the same. Karen still kissed me goodbye every morning, still asked if I wanted eggs or toast, still reminded me when Emily was coming over. Nothing had changed, except everything had. I made a promise to myself. I wasn't going to become one of those husbands, the suspicious kind, checking her phone while she showered, following her car, looking for reasons not to trust her. I'd watched friends do that. By the end, nobody remembered whether there'd been an affair, only that the marriage had become miserable. I wasn't going to live like that. So every question that came into my head, I pushed it back down. A couple of Sundays later, Emily came over with her husband. We grilled chicken in the backyard. Leaves had started piling against the fence. Karen and Emily carried dessert inside, while my son-in-law helped me clean the grill. Later, Emily stood beside me drying dishes. She smiled. Mum seems happy lately. I nodded. Yeah. She dried another plate. Then, without looking at me, she quietly added, just not with you. I stopped wiping the counter. What do you mean? She shrugged. I don't know. Forget I said anything. Before I could ask another question, Karen walked back into the kitchen carrying coffee. The moment disappeared. Emily never mentioned it again. She didn't have to. That night, I woke up around 10:30. Karen's side of the bed was empty. I walked downstairs. The porch light was on. She sat outside wrapped in a blanket, phone in both hands. Then, she smiled. I hadn't seen that smile in months. Not polite, not distracted, completely present. For a second, She looked 20 years younger. I stood behind the kitchen window. She never saw me. I watched maybe 10 seconds. Then I quietly went back upstairs. Lying in bed, I asked myself one question. When was the last time she'd smiled like that because of something I'd said? I couldn't remember. That scared me more than whoever was on the other end of the conversation. The next morning, I almost asked. The words were already there. Who's been texting you? Instead, I poured another cup of coffee. You walking tonight? She looked up. Probably. Mind if I come? She hesitated, just for a second. I think I'd rather go by myself. She wasn't being cruel. She wasn't hiding anything. She simply wanted to be alone. Or maybe not alone. A few days later, I stopped at the bakery after work. Karen loved cinnamon bread. I hadn't bought it in years. When I set the bag on the kitchen counter, she smiled. Oh, I forgot how much I missed this. So did I. We toasted a couple of slices after dinner. For 15 minutes, we sounded like ourselves again. Emily's new garden, a movie we'd both forgotten we'd already seen. The neighbor who still couldn't park straight. I caught myself thinking, maybe I really have imagined all of this. Then her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen, stood up. I'll be right back. The screen door clicked shut behind her. I stayed at the table. Her second slice of cinnamon bread sat untouched on the plate. The butter had already started melting into it. I don't know why, but that piece of bread is still what I remember. Not the phone, not the message, the bread. It was like she'd left our conversation halfway through. That's when I finally admitted something I'd been avoiding. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was lonely. Somehow, I'd spent months sitting across from my wife every evening without realizing we were having fewer and fewer conversations that belonged only to us. Maybe she'd been lonely too. Maybe we'd simply been lonely in different ways. The following Saturday morning was grey and cold. Karen sat in the sunroom with a cup of tea and one of her photography magazines. Birds, old barns, country roads. Photography had become her retirement hobby. She'd joined an online photography group months earlier. I'd barely noticed. I carried my coffee into the room and sat across from her. She looked up immediately. You okay? I nodded, then shook my head. No. She quietly folded the magazine closed. What is it? I wrapped both hands around my coffee mug, looked out the window, then back at her. I need you to answer one question. She waited. Is there somebody else? She didn't speak. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked once, then again. Finally, she took a slow breath. No. Every muscle in my shoulders relaxed. For exactly 2 seconds, then she quietly said, But there's somebody I talk to. Everything inside me went completely still. I don't know how long we sat there, probably less than a minute. It felt much longer. Finally, I asked, Who is he? Karen looked down into her tea. A man from my photography group. I waited. We've never met. She looked up just long enough to make sure I'd heard her. We've never even talked on the phone. It's only messages. How long? A few months. Every day? She nodded. Most days. That answer landed harder than I expected. Not because she'd lied, because she'd answered without trying to soften it. I wanted to ask 20 questions. Only one came out. Why him? She rubbed her thumb along the handle of her mug. I don't know. You have to know something. She shook her head. It didn't start that way. Then how did it start? She let out a slow breath. He commented on one of my pictures. That's all. We talked about cameras, then hiking, books, music, the places we'd always wanted to visit. She stopped. It was easy. No romance, no flirting, no promises, just conversation, day after day. One message turned into 10. 10 became 50. Without either of them planning it, he became the first person she wanted to tell things to. I stared at the table. So, every day, you were talking to him? She nodded. And I had no idea. No, I guess you didn't. There wasn't any defensiveness in her voice, just disappointment, mostly with herself. What did you tell him? She thought about it. Everything. That single word filled the room. Everything. She looked at me. I told him Emily called. I told him my tomato plants finally died. I told him I couldn't sleep. I told him I was nervous about getting older. She stopped talking, then quietly said, "One day I realized I hadn't told you any of those things." For a moment, I couldn't speak. It wasn't another man knowing those stories that hurt. It was realizing I no longer did. I never touched him. I know. I never wanted to leave you. I nodded. I believe you. I never stopped loving you. I looked at her for a long time. I believe that too. She frowned. Then why do you look like I've already left? The answer came out before I could think about it. Because somewhere along the way, you stopped bringing your life home to me. She closed her eyes. When she opened them again, they were wet. I know. For a while, neither of us said anything. Then she spoke so quietly, I almost missed it. You were always tired. I'd heard those words before. This time, they sounded different. I'd start telling you something, and you'd already be answering emails, or watching the game. Or you'd say, "Give me 1 second." She gave a tired smile. It was always 1 second. I looked down at my hands. Little memories started finding me. Karen standing in the garage doorway while I finished paperwork, holding up her phone. "Look at this." Without looking, I'd answered, "In a minute." Another evening, she'd started telling me about one of her students. I'd nodded through half the story, then realized I hadn't heard a word she'd said. At the time, none of those moments had seemed important. Together, they had become our marriage. I rubbed my forehead. I thought I was doing what a husband was supposed to do. You were. I worked. I paid the bills. I kept this house running. She nodded. You did. I've never questioned that. Then she looked straight at me. But somewhere along the way, we stopped wondering about each other. That sentence hurt because I couldn't argue with it. When was the last time I'd asked Karen a question? Not because I needed an answer, but because I wanted to know what was happening inside her head. I honestly couldn't remember. Finally, I asked the question I'd been afraid of since this conversation started. Do you love him? She didn't answer. The grandfather clock ticked twice, maybe 3 times. Then she looked at me. I don't know. I felt my stomach drop. Before I could speak, she reached across the table, not for my hand, just close enough that I knew she wanted to. Then she quietly said, "But I know this. I don't want to lose us." Neither of us cried. Neither of us made promises. There wasn't much either of us could promise that morning. Trust doesn't come back because 2 people decide it should. It comes back one ordinary day at a time. She ended the messages herself. I never asked to read them, never asked for passwords. If she'd stayed only because I forced her to, we would have already been finished. The first few weeks felt awkward. We'd start talking, then run out of words, so we started walking instead. Every evening after dinner, no phones, no television waiting in the living room, just the two of us walking through the neighborhood. Some nights we talked the whole time. Some nights we barely spoke at all. Both were better than silence in separate rooms. A couple of months later, we were halfway around the block when Karen started laughing. Mrs. Peterson accidentally called one of her students Dad today. She smiled, then stopped, pulled the phone out of her pocket, looked at it for a second. I almost texted him that. She slipped the phone back into her jacket, then she looked at me. Anyway, as I was saying, she finished the story. This time, she was telling it to me. We reached the end of the street just as the sun was dropping behind the trees. Karen slowed down. Without saying anything, she slipped her hand into mine. Not dramatically, not like we were 25 again, just naturally, like someone remembering where something belonged after it had been sitting in the wrong place for a long time. We turned around and started walking home. I used to think affairs began with lies. Now I think ours began the day we stopped telling each other the little things.